Hello. I recently finished a new, relatively long novel. It's almost 500 pages, and it was somewhat slow to start, but ultimately I found it so engaging and moving. And it's interesting because I think initially it presents a couple of challenges for readers, I mean, beyond just its length, but in its construction and because of the length of the book, it is so effective and powerful. And so I want to explain why. So the novel is Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst, and I read this with my online book club. We had lots of great discussions about it, and the challenging things I think about it are, one, there's the pace of the book, and it's quite leisurely in how it relates its story. It's really not necessarily plot driven. If you know Alan Hollinghurst's work at all, you know that it's more about the observations of social scenes and the settings that he creates and reading between the lines of what characters are saying. And it's very much a book in two parts, in that the first half is following the years at school of a boy, and then the second half is to do with the rest of his life into his later years. And because the first half is all of these scenes at school, and so it's very much things are happening to this character rather than him necessarily making many things happen. And that really reflects the experience of youth, isn't it? Where we're just kind of observing the world around us, and don't really have too much control in what we're doing. And but the language that he uses, it's so beautiful and well crafted that there can be so much pleasure taken from that. But also the scenes in the first half of this book are so important to the later half, and so I think really like justify taking this pace with the story, and ultimately like building up to his adulthood. And the second challenge that I think it initially presents to the reader is actually in the blurb and this UK edition, and the way the story is described on the inside flap to give an impression of the overall story, which I think is somewhat, I mean, it's not misleading, but it definitely set me up for expectations, which wasn't what I found in the bulk of the story. So it explains how this follows the perspective of a character named Dave Wynn, and we follow him from his boarding school days throughout his life, but also how he has a connection with a contemporary of his, another boy named Giles. And so it describes how it follows these two men throughout their lives. And the novel does that, but I would say that Giles is much more kind of on the periphery. It's not so much about their connection with each other. He's definitely always a presence there, and he keeps popping up throughout the narrative, but it's much more centered in the experience of Dave Wynn and following his life and his development, because he is in many ways like a classic Alan Hollinghurst character, in that he's both an insider and an outsider. So he has access to this elite education and going to boarding school because he receives a scholarship, and so everything about his character and in the makeup of his personality and sensibility, it's really shaped by this English education and growing up in England. But he is also an outsider because of a few characteristics of him to do with his class, his race, and his sexuality. So he is the son of a single working class seamstress mother, and his father is Burmese, but he's never met him. He knows very little about him, and so doesn't have any contact with him. So he's biracial, but he does have darker skin, and so this really sets him apart from a lot of other boys, and makes him a kind of mark in in his school, and particularly with Giles, who is the son of a white English, very wealthy family. Giles bullies him quite horribly a lot in their early years, and so he's subject at this boarding school to both to passive racism, but also to quite aggressive and overt and horrible instances of racism, and following his character and the encounters he has with other people. I mean, it becomes so exhausting in how in almost every white English person he meets, he'll inevitably be asked the question of, oh, where do you come from? And of course, he can't just answer, oh, from an English county, because then the next question will be, oh, but where do you really come from? And then he'll have to, explain that his father was Burmese, but he's never met him. He's never been to Burma. He has no real connection with this country because he is entirely English in his character. And so the strangeness of this and the frustration of it is really made evident in the story. And I think Hollinghurst is really effective in doing that. And of course, I was naturally suspicious going into this of Alan Hollinghurst, a white Englishman writing about a biracial man. Would this really come across well? But I think it is very effective and moving in how he portrays it, and very sympathetic in how he does so. And also Dave Wynn is a gay man, and so we follow his sexual development as he discovers his attraction for other men in his youth and his adolescence, and going to this boarding school and having crushes on other men, and then eventually having relationships with other men in his adulthood, and so following the development and journey of his sexuality. And because this begins in the 1960s, when he was younger, England, laws in England changed very dramatically over that time. And so we follow the political developments in the country in regards to sexuality alongside his own personal development, and how he grows into this, but also in his connection with his mother. She has a kind of co-partner in business who's a well-to-do woman, and but then it becomes increasingly clear but that they are having a romantic relationship with each other and are a couple. And I think it is so tender and moving how that is portrayed, the relationship between his mother and her partner, because it's very clear to Dave that this is what they are, but it's never openly talked about, and it's kind of this open secret. But also Dave doesn't talk about his sexuality for a long time as well. So there's this tension in this family dynamic, this tight-knit family dynamic, which in a lot of ways is very warm and supportive, and it's really lovely how it's portrayed. There's a whole section early on in the book where they go on this seaside holiday, and we follow them as Dave is kind of going in on the beach and looking at the different men, but also discovering that there's this hidden gay world around him when he discovers some graffiti in public toilets, and how it portrays the tension of this family dynamic. I think is just so moving and really beautiful and really believable, and so I just loved how he did that. And in some ways, Dave's time at this boarding school is really supportive and nurturing. He gets a great education. He develops a passion for music and has some great connections and communications with some older teachers of his, but also develops a real passion and love for acting, and he ultimately becomes an actor. But this is partly develops out of his experiences of racism and the pressure he feels from older boys, and so one way that youth especially deal with tension when they're seen as a bit of an outsider and might be picked on, a way to diffuse that is to use humor. And so something Dave does is he'll do impressions of people, especially of the classic English character of Jeeves. And so if you know Jeeves, he's a manservant to this wealthy man of leisure, and but he's a quintessentially English character. And so Dave will do these Jeeves impressions, which makes all of his classmates laugh. And so any like tension or risk of bullying that was there is immediately diffused. And I think it is so great how Hollinghurst portrays that, and because that feels very real. But it also leads into this desire Dave has for acting, and how he ultimately becomes an actor, which is his profession throughout his life, which presents a lot of challenges to him as a biracial man. So because of the color of his skin, he will often be cast in certain roles. But then as time goes on and there are developments in theater and in culture, he does ultimately find that there are more roles and avenues open to him. But how Giles enters into the story is because he is the son of the Hadlows, who sponsor Dave in his education. And so the very first scene of the novel is when Dave goes to the Hadlows' home, and he wants to thank them for sponsoring his education, but also he meets Giles there, who is a classmate of his, and we see the tension between them because Giles is a snob, he's entitled, and he's very conservative in his values, even though his parents are quite liberal and like dedicated to the arts, and so they're quite like confused about why Giles is this way, but that is just the way he is, and it's the way he remains throughout his life, as we follow Dave's story, and as he goes through his life, there are various points where his experiences intersect with those of Giles. And there's a notable scene later on when Dave has been an actor for quite a long time. He ultimately writes a book about his acting experience, and so he goes to a literary festival to talk about his book, and Giles also happens to be there because he is a rising member of the Conservative Party. He's anti-immigration, and he's very vocal about this, and he's achieved quite a following because of that. And they meet at this literary event, which I have to wonder if this is slightly based on Hollinghurst's own experience as an early novelist, and going to some of these literary festivals that are like held in like big English like country homes, and because yeah, the whole dynamics of that whole situation is really like juicy, and it's very funny to follow, although like slightly tragic in a way because there aren't many people in Dave's audience, but there are very worryingly a lot of people that go to Giles's event and that are part of his followers, and that because of the values that he portrays, it enables, yeah, a lot of people to suddenly speak up, who have these very conservative values, or that could be called racist values as well, and leads them to express it openly. But this ultimately leads and builds up to the vote on Brexit in the UK, moving forward into a future time, and when Giles becomes a central part of that. And I think that is why the novel is described as this way in the inside cover, and it is charting the changes in politics and social changes over a long period of time and over multiple decades in this story. And I think it is very effective in doing that. But I think at the real heart of the story, and what I found so tender and beautiful about this book, is in the portrayal of Dave's experience itself. And so as it is a book in two halves, in the second half following his later life, there are also many scenes when Dave goes back to the locations of his childhood, of his hometown, and his home, and his school, and then re-experiencing these locations as an adult. And the way it shows how he is this presence in these locations, which he originated from, but he is now kind of an outsider to it. And so like this is how like he's both an insider and outsider to his life because of time, and the way this maps time, I think, is so masterful, because it shows the process of aging and how, in a sense, we all become ghosts to the person that we were in our childhood. And so when we go back to these locations of our youth that have a real like focus and emotional power in our memories, it's a very strange experience, because you almost feel like a ghost that's inhabiting these locations of the past, and suddenly feel like an outsider even though you've come from these places. And that's very much how Dave feels going to these different locations and experiencing them again and again. So he'll revisit them sometimes multiple times, and it'll have different meanings over the course of the story. And so I just found it so powerful, and how it does that. And maybe now, because I'm getting on in years too, and so I can really experience this and understand this sense of relating the past and my memories of the past, and then how that becomes overlaid with the present, and how that almost changes the landscape around me as I see it, and as I revisit different locations that had a lot of meaning for me before. And so I found that so wonderful in how he portrays that. But also, I think it's not an entirely perfect book, because it is constructed in a certain way, and this means that, and we are so rooted in Dave's experience, that we necessarily don't always get the point of view or the full story about other characters that we might like to read about. So, and if if he had constructed this novel when sort of alternating chapters going between Dave and Giles's perspective, that would have really changed the nature of the story and our understanding of these different characters. And equally, if he had told some of the story from the perspective of his mother Avril and her partner Esme, and then we would have got much more about their stories, and we don't find out so much about these characters in the second half of the novel, because naturally when he becomes an adult, he has less to do with immediately to do with his mother, and so we just don't see her as much, or find out what is happening in her relationship and her life, which is a shame, because I really loved the character of his mother and would have loved to follow more about her. But I think it is right that Hollinghurst has constructed and made the choices that he did in this novel, because it's very effective in how he's done it. But it's just the I guess consequence of an author having to make a choice about the point of view and the way that a novel is narrated, that it's going to necessarily limit it in certain ways. But I think it's a tribute to the power of the story, and that I was so engaged by it and really wanted to learn more about these characters. Like, in a way, I wish it had been a much longer book, though I know for some readers that would have made it like drag a lot longer. But I think because of following the leisurely pace of the story, and how it builds up this sense of awareness of Dave's life and his surroundings, that the later parts of the novel are incredibly moving. At least I found them to be so. So yeah, I think this is an absolutely excellent novel that's masterfully written and constructed and so beautiful in its observations and there's so many great little details and different scenes that are interesting to mull over, but also in the whole construction of the book itself and ultimately I'm not going to give anything away, but ultimately finding out why it's being written and how things end up, and it's motivated me to want to like someday like go back and reread this because I'm sure the experience of it will be much different, knowing the full course and trajectory of his life, to follow it from his story from the very beginning throughout his life. And yeah, so I really enjoyed this book. I think it's excellent. I think Alan Hollinghurst is one of the best English novelists that we have right now, and yeah, such a wonderful reading experience. But I would love to know if you've read this book, if you're interested in reading it now. Are you a Hollinghurst fan? Let me know all about that in the comments below. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.